So with the release of AFL Evolution 2 supposedly just a few months away, I'm going to go through all the things that I hope to see in the game, starting off with 8 essential improvements for player career mode. I would love to see an actual AFL draft added to the game. Now, of course, you got to give players a choice because not all players are going to want to necessarily go through the draft and go to a random team. While some of us love that realism, others not so much. Some people just want to play for their favorite team. So give players the option to either choose their favorite team from the get-go or to go through the draft and get picked up by any of the 18 teams. Now I think when you get taken in the draft should depend on a few different factors. If you're starting your player career down at state league levels and WAFL and VFL, SANFL, all that kind of stuff, then your draft position should really be determined by your performance over the last season or two in those leagues. So if you've been one of the best players down there and you've been dominating the league, then you should be a high draft pick. If not, you're going to be taken somewhere in the middle or towards the end of the draft. And perhaps where you get taken in the draft can affect the expectations for you in your first season. If you're starting your player career though straight at AFL level, then I guess you just base it on your statistics. At number 2 is positions. Now in Evolution 1, the only real position that mattered was midfield. You know, if you played midfield, you got a lot of the ball, you got involved in a lot of the play. If you're like me, you probably started in wherever it was that you actually did play in real life. So for me, that was forward pocket, and forward pocket is definitely a hard position to get a lot of the ball in the actual game. So there's a lot of positions on the ground that just couldn't get involved as much when they played Be a Pro mode in the game. Part of this is just the nature of the game, the nature of the sport you're playing. You know, if you look at stuff like basketball and soccer, there's less players on a smaller field, so most people are going to get involved at some point or another. In AFL, 18 players on a much larger field means you don't get as many possessions as you might if you were, let's say, in the middle compared to up forward or down back. But I still feel like in Evolution 1 there were too many times when you were stuck down one end of the field waiting for the AI midfielders or teammates to get the ball down to you. And you know, it felt a bit unrealistic in that regard. The small glimpses we've been able to see of gameplay from Evolution 2, just from a little, like the teaser clips, the day-night transition clip we saw and stuff like that, seem to indicate that we might be getting gameplay that's a bit less rigid to positions. So instead of having, you know, 3 players on every line and sticking to those positions mostly, it looks like players are going to kind of move up and down the ground and all those kind of things. So if you're down somewhere on the full forward line, you know, and the ball's up the other end of the field, you're probably going to be pushing up towards the halfway point of the field, which should make it easier for you to get a bit more involved in the play. So hopefully that's something they've already fixed. Something that has become a staple of all sports games and all kind of My Career or Be a Pro modes is live stat tracking and feedback on the go. So if you played something like NBA 2K's My Career mode, for example, you've no doubt seen in the corner of the screen there's, you know, a graphic that gives you all your statistics, you know, in different categories and an overall grade, and tells you how well you're doing in that particular game. This was something that was, you know, sorely lacking in Evolution 1. There was no real indicator of your performance, definitely not while you were playing in game. So something I would love to see in Evolution 2's player career mode is live stat tracking, telling us, you know, all the kind of key stats in our game if we're playing up forward, how many goals we got, how many possessions, all this kind of stuff, goal assists, all the stuff that is key to each position. And on top of that, I'd like to see some kind of overall rating or grade system to tell you how you're doing in game. So that kind of feeds into my next point, which is better communication, specifically between coaches and players. In AFL Evo 1's player career mode, they have the section, the email inbox, where you're supposed to get messages, but the only real messages you get are, you know, who you're playing that week, and maybe you might get an update if you're injured or suspended, but other than that, the inbox is barely used in that game. So what I'd like to see in Evolution 2 is just some more communication between your player and the coach. You know, every week post-game, I'd love to receive some kind of feedback as to the things I did well, the things I did not so well. And then pre-game, sort of on the Wednesday or Thursday before a game that weekend, I'd love to get a message that, you know, says, hey, this is what you did well last game, this is what you didn't do well, this is what you can improve on for this week. And maybe you have, you know, certain statistical goals you want to hit and all those kind of things. Just some kind of expectations for you. This is also true, you know, sort of at quarter time breaks and stuff like that. We talked in the previous point about better feedback during the game, you know, telling us how we're going. And that's, you know, especially true at the quarter times break. You know, tell us at quarter time, at half time, at three-quarter time. You know, tell us what we did right and wrong in that quarter. A good example of a fairly simplistic version of this is in EA Sports NHL games, where every time you come off onto the bench, you basically get a list of things you did right and wrong. And it's nothing too crazy or nothing too detailed or complex. It's just basically, if you did a good pass, then they say, hey, that's a great pass, you know? So in AFL, you could do, if you kicked a good goal, you'd say, hey, good goal. If you turned it over, then they say, hey, watch your turnovers. Simple stuff like that, but it just goes a long way to, one, creating more realism, but two, I think it also helps you know what you're supposed to be doing, you know, what expectations there are of you, and whether you're hitting your performance targets or not. One of the big things that was missing from AFL Evolution 1's player career mode was of course the ability to be dropped. This was not only a huge missing feature because it took away from the realism, but also because the state teams were there in the game. You know, we had Waffle, we had Neefle, Sandful, VFL, all these teams, we had them. So why couldn't we integrate that system where you could be dropped back to the seconds and to the lower levels? So in Evo 2, if I'm playing shit, I want to know about it. I want to be dropped to the 2s and try and earn my spot back. When I'm first drafted, I would love to have to earn my spot in the team. There aren't many teams where your draftees are going to be straight on walk-up starters, you know? Unless you're going to, say, a Gold Coast or a Carlton, most teams, especially if you're being drafted by one of the top teams, it's going to be hard to earn a spot in that starting lineup. So perhaps when you get drafted, you get a first couple of JLT series games that the coach gives you a chance, you know, gives you a bit of a trial, sees how you go, and depending on how you perform in those games, it decides, you know, when you might be called up. So if you play really well, you might get a round 1 call up. If not, you got to go start down in the seconds and work your way in. Similar to what I said before about coach feedback, I'd also love some kind of goals set for call up. So perhaps you could have like a call up meter that basically tells you how close you are to being called up for a senior game. As I'm playing in the seconds and I'm getting closer and closer to hitting my statistical goals, that will build up the call-up meter and get me closer and closer to AFL selection. So if I've made my AFL debut, but after a couple of games I'm starting to not perform as well as I was, you know, then the meter drops again and you're in danger of being dropped back to the state leagues. And while we're on the subject of debut games, it'd also be nice if they made this game a little bit special. Even something as simple as a commentary line from Hutto or Gary Lyon, just pointing out that, you know, this player's playing their first game and, you know, showing that person on screen when they say it. Just something like that to make the debut a little bit special, a little bit different to every other game you're going to play. This would also be the case for stuff like milestone games. You know, if I'm playing my 150th, it should say that on the team banner before the game, and commentators should make a note of it throughout the coverage. Small little details like this can go a long way to adding realism to the game. Leave your thoughts down below. You know, what did you think of some of the things I listed? What do you want to see in player career mode for Evolution 2? And remember to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.